Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Molten Music Technology. Today we're looking at the Moog Animoog Z. Yes, the Animoog Z, the Animoog Z, is a brand new version of Moog's Animoog. Now, Animoog came out about a decade ago. 10 years, it popped up onto the iPhone and the iPad and just went, this is how you do interactive touch interface synthesis on iOS. This is how you do it. Now, there were other synths around at the time, but it seemed to break new ground in both being visually exciting and really embracing the idea of the touch interface. And it was something that didn't exist before. It wasn't an emulation, it wasn't a copy of something or trying to be anything other than what it was. Because what it actually was a little bit mysterious and lost behind the awesomeness of that front end and the wonderful sound that came from it, because essentially it was a wavetable synth. It used a whole bunch of wavetables within a grid that allowed you to access those and modulate and morph between them, generating some really nice sounds with some really nice effects with a really nice touch interface. So all of that Moog have brought forward 10 years into the Animoog Z. Animoog Z. I'm going to call it the Animoog Z, I think, if that's all right. And Animoog Z very much takes that same idea. It's the same sound engine as far as I can work out and just pushes it out into another dimension, that Z dimension. Now, Moog sent this to me as a beta version in order to do this review for release, which is very exciting. But I did stress to them that I only actually have an iPhone as far as compatibility with this app. And they said, oh, all right then, we'll give that a go. So here I am, I'm doing the iPhone review. So none of that lovely big large screen iPad nonsense. No, we are going to get ourselves involved in the minutiae, in the tiny fiddly fobbly little bits of the iPhone. So this is obviously going to colour the review somewhat, but perhaps, or at least I hope, it's going to bring another angle to it to see whether this thing is actually usable in this format. Does it work? Does it sound great? Is it manipulable enough? Can you get your fingers in there in this format? Now, there's bound to be a lot of great sound demos out there now. And in fact, because Animoog Z is free to download, you can go and try out all the presets yourself. So I'm not going to spend a whole load of time demonstrating the sound. Rather, I'm going to look at how it works, how easy is it to get your fingers in there, and maybe we'll create a patch together and see how that goes. And then I'll just share my thoughts on what I think about the whole deal. Does that sound all right? Now, this is not really going to work, me sitting here waving this thing at you. So I'm going to bring the camera in, focus on the iPhone itself, and see what occurs. Now, obviously, if you're using the phone, you just use the phone. You might plug in your headphones or your Bluetooth earbuds or something like that in order to play with it and to hear it. In order for me to adequately demonstrate it in this situation, I'm going to need to plug it into a load of stuff to make that sort of work, which is going to make it slightly unrealistically unwieldy, perhaps, but we'll see how we go with that. But I want to be able to record sound properly, but also it gives me an opportunity to show you how to plug all this crap in, because maybe you'd like to use a MIDI keyboard and an audio interface with Animoog, and let's see how that works. So in order to get MIDI and audio in here, you are going to need to start with, I think at least, the camera kit. So this is what gives you lightning at one end and a USB socket at the other. This is the essential big fat annoying dongle that gets you to be able to plug other things into your iPhone. So we're going to start off with that. Now, that only gives you one USB port, which isn't necessarily any good. However, I'm using the Arturia mini fuse here, which is a nice fresh new audio interface, and that has MIDI in and out. So I could just plug this in and then get plug MIDI via regular MIDI ports from a MIDI controller keyboard directly into here. It also has a a USB hub socket as well, which means I could piggyback a MIDI keyboard into there as well. But I'm actually going to make things more complicated because I want to plug in a couple of different things in order to show you how those work. And so to make all of that happen, what you need is a hub. This is a USB hub here. Now if you get a powered hub, it means you can also charge your phone at the same time, which is another thing which is kind of vital, I suppose. But the beauty of the hub is that I can plug anything that's class compliant into here: audio interface, MIDI keyboard, weirdo MIDI keyboard, and have that all go into the single port, and it's all just going to work. That's the plan, right? So let me just show you how to do that, because I find that sort of thing interesting. So audio interface, plug that in to the hub. That should hopefully turn on. Yes, it has. MIDI keyboard, right? Plug that in as well. So that's now on. The Rolly C board, we'll come back to that in a little bit. So that's those two things plugged in. The other thing I want is charging. Now at the bottom of this hub, it's got a couple of charging ports which are going to be enough to charge the phone. Now this goes into the little lightning port on the camera kit, and hopefully we'll keep charging it so that we don't just run out of steam. So then finally I take the output of the hub, plug that into the camera kit, and now hopefully the iPhone is going to recognize the audio interface, it's going to recognize the MIDI keyboard, and allow us to use those two things with the Animoog Z. Got it? Great. Yeah, look, see, I'm getting lights on there. Great, so what about the MIDI keyboard? Alright, nothing coming out of there as yet. For this we have to go into the settings, go into MIDI, and enable the MIDI input, which is popped up there, the key step 37. So Arturia really has got their hardware sorted out in terms of working with the iPhone. So with all that functioning, I'm just going to rig this up so we can get a proper focus on the iPhone and go from there. So here we have Animoog Z with its anisotropic synthesizer engine, something like that. The idea being that things sound different depending on which direction you are taking them from. I've just set this preset up to look like the original Animoog, and you can see that it has that sort of familiar, interesting grid, oscilloscope style interface. And that is definitely what this is all about. The idea behind the sound engine is that you have this grid. You have 8 rows and 16 columns. Each row, each of these 8 here, can be a timbre or a timbre, depending on your mode of speech, but a timbre. And a timbre contains 16 waveforms. A timbre you could essentially see as being a wavetable containing 16 waves which go along here. So each patch contains 8 of these timbres with 16 waveforms, and you can move around within this grid in order to morph between and modulate between those possible 128 waveforms. Although more commonly you're going to have sort of one waveform which varies a little bit along, and another one which is a bit different, and then some which are the same and some which are completely static. So as you move about, it should be accessing different waveforms, depending on the patch obviously. Now with Animoog Z, what they've done is they've given us a new dimension. So you can move it now not only in X and Y, but also up and down. Let me show you a couple of different patches just to whet your appetite. I think you get the idea. So you have this 3D space, this wave cube, in which your sound evolves, modulates, morphs into other things and other waveforms. It modulates, it moves, it animates. It's very, very interesting. Right, let's start with a very, very basic patch. So the only sound that's going on is right at this point of origin. If we look at it from the top, we can move it around and that point will pick out different waveforms on the grid. So that is classic wavetable morphing, just going between waves as you move. Now, of course, we can add a path so that rather than being in a static place, it will start to move through those by itself. Go into edit mode, go to add a point, add another point. And the sound will make its way very slowly along that path. See how I can speed that up. And I can create new nodes and the path will continue to follow that. I can decide whether I want that to go forwards and backwards or just in one direction or not. See, that's already a very, very lovely little thing. Now, that's not the half of it, because so far we are only moving in 2 dimensions. If we put this back to the front, we can see now in our 3D wave cube that we're just messing around here, whereas this can actually be up here. As well, because the Z dimension allows you to morph in another direction. What it's essentially doing is taking the XY grid, which is on the bottom, and reflecting that up to the back. So you've also got morphing in this direction as well as the XY directions, giving you access to even more possibilities of mixing and morphing together different waveforms from the 8 timbres and the 16 waveforms that are within there. You can also, of course, tie the axis, the X, Y and Z, to other forms of modulation to change the filter, to change the effects and other bits and pieces which we'll come to. But in terms of editing our paths, I can stick a path up here. Let's look at the orbit. Now with orbit you can push these comets, as Moog calls them, off their trajectory in order to gather in more modulation and more possibilities and other waveforms. And you can do that in all 3 dimensions. Then if you take yourself out of edit mode, you can move this in space to do further real-time modulations. You can do it while you're playing. I'm going to have to save this one. That's the best thing I've ever done. Right, so timbres then. Let's have a look at that. So each of these patches contains 8 timbres. You got them here, 8 wavetables if you like. You've got a list of wavetables here that you can choose from, and then you stack them up here, and that creates those 8 rows. Now the way that Animoog works is that as your comets are moving around, they are always occupied with more than one thing. They're not just playing one waveform. They are simultaneously morphing between the wavetables above it and beneath it, and also the waves to the one side and the other. So whatever point of space it's in, it's always mixing between different waveforms. And that means that the order that you put these in can be very important, because what is adjacent to it is going to get mixed with it at the same time. So there's a whole other level of thought you need to get into here in how you arrange these 8 timbres. Now changing timbres is very simple. You just select it and then choose another one, and then that's there. And you can audition the wavetable to hear what it sounds like. You can also do it over here before you allocate it. So it's super easy and super quick to build up your own preset, your own patch from the wavetables that are there. But what's perhaps more interesting is that you can edit these wavetables, or even more interesting is that you can import your own. So let's select one and have a look at it. This is the entirety of the timbre shown on the screen, and you've got the 16 slices, and inside each one you can have a different waveform. Doesn't have to be, it can be one waveform that's completely static or one that's changing like this is over time. Lovely. Let's try something less horrible. You get the idea, yeah? And I can edit this, I can pull in, I can pull in one side, make it, change it around, move exactly where I want this particular bit to be within the context of these 16 columns. So I can then insert other waves in here in order to create my wavetable of up to 16 waves. Although what is probably most interesting is recording your own. So hit the record button, and you can now record anything you like into the top here and then extract waveforms from it. So I can use the iPhone's microphone just to record directly in. Obviously you can record in from anything, or you can in fact load your own recorded WAV files. But let's just keep this simple. Hit record, make a noise, ta-da! Great. Skip across to where it is you want to use that. Lovely. Now I know you're expecting it to be a sample of the voice, the noise that I just made. It's not that. Animoog is extracting waveforms. It's not using samples as a sampled instrument. It just wants a tiny, weeny little bit of audio to use as a whole wavetable of waveforms. So I can insert that, and that now has become my timbre. But maybe Maybe I don't want one waveform, maybe I want 16, or maybe not quite so many. Let's see if I can add a few more to it. So I'm going to bring this one down so it's only the size of 4. Update that. I'm going to record something else. Boom! Use a bit of that. Insert that. Record something else. Bit of that. One more. Ooh. And now I've got my completed weirdo timbre. I can save that. And now that is a timbre I can use. I can select that for everything if I wanted. And now we have some weirdness going on in our orbital space station of Comets. Maybe it'd be better to combine it with a couple of other waveforms. Let's clear this and let's put a path at a diagonal. So we can feel it moving through my timbre to something else. It is absolutely fascinating. Animoog also has lots of other synthesizer features. Once you've moved past the creation and modulation of your timbres, you can move into envelopes. You've got 3 envelopes, one for the amplifier, one for the filter, one for the modulation. You can go into more detail of the individual bits and pieces. You've actually got 5 whole stages you can play with if you so wish. They will also loop and they can also delay. LFOs are similar. You've got shape that you can change all the way to something a bit more pulsy, sawtooth back to sine waves. They've also got a lot more detail, and again you can make them delay and you can also make them repeat. So rather than having a constant wobble, you've got a wobble that happens for a couple of times and then stops. Some very interesting possibilities within there. Then you've got the modulation section, and this is a 10 slot modulation matrix where you can choose any of the available sources, which are the modulators or the axis of the wave cube, the X, Y and Z axis, and you can send those to any of the effects or the LFOs or the pitch or the filter to make interesting things happen. And you can also sort of countenance them with a control option, so you can add velocity or pressure or the mod wheel that has an effect on the amount of modulation that's going on. This is a really interesting, a really neat modulation engine that gets everything moving, because everything is about movement. Animoog is about movement, and these levels of modulation are really, really interesting. Nice. And finally, at the effects section, you have 5 stomp box style effects. you have an arpeggiator, a filter, a thickener, a delay, and a looper. I mean, only really the thick and the delay are actual effects, and within there you've got some detuning, which is really nice, some bit crushing, and some overdrive. A delay, of course. And then of course you've got the filter. Low pass, band pass and high pass. And then finally you've got a looper. Now a looper is something that you had in the original as well, although interestingly later on they added a 4-track recorder to the original Animoog, which isn't in here as far as I can tell, and maybe it's something that they'll add later on. But what we've got is a recorder where you can overdub stuff. Select another sound. Or something like that. I mean, obviously this is audio upon audio, so you're not going to go back and edit it. You can't then change things afterwards. You are just recording and overdubbing live in order to generate something. You can then take that, export it to SoundCloud, and everyone will applaud your awesomeness. So that's the general workings of Animoog Z. But how playable is it in the iPhone format? That is really the question we need to get down to in here, because undoubtedly with an iPad, with a large screen, getting your fingers into all this business here, playing these keys here is going to be awesome and dreamlike. In this format, is it going to work though? I mean, I've connected a MIDI keyboard, which is fine, but as soon as you do that, you lose one of the vital parts of the playability of the Animoog, and that's the pressure. Pressure, you say, on an iPhone? Yeah. We call it pressure. What it is pushing forward on the little keys down here. As you can see, it sort of fills up. And that can be tied to all sorts of things, to modulation, to filter cutoff. But it's fiddly to do on here. Now you have this arrow here which will bring up a larger version of the keyboard. And that is undoubtedly a good thing. But now I can't see the orbs, I can't see or do anything with the other forms of interactive modulation. It is a lovely thing. I mean, the keyboard itself is great. I mean, this is one of those things which is designed to be used with touch and works brilliantly. It's essentially like a touch plate, like you'd find on a booklet. And that does not get translated into your MIDI keyboard. However, there's something I could do about that. I can use an MPE controller like this fella here, and that should give me back the pressure. So let's try that out. Now, Animoog has the ability to connect to Bluetooth devices, but this is also just turned up via USB, so I'm just going to turn that on there. And that is indeed working. Let me just pull you out a little bit so you can see this. So with something like the C board, I have pressure by pushing in on the key into its sponginess. So something like this, the C board can really add or bring back that dimension that you might lost through trying to fiddle around with the keys here. Adding a MIDI keyboard, you lose that ability to press in that pressure. With the C board, it comes back. What you don't get is any mapping for this forward and backwards bit, but you do get the pressure. So there we are, the Animoog Z. What do we think of that then? Well, I mean, for an app, for your iPhone, for the iPad, it's pretty phenomenal. I mean, it sounds great. It feels lovely to play with. The space that you have for modulation is awesome. But all of these things were true of the first Animoog. The level of interaction, the things that you could do. And it's left me wondering a little bit what it is the Animoog Z really brings to the table. I mean, what is interesting is the way that Moog have shifted the focus. They've put the focus squarely onto the wavetable side, onto the timbres, onto the orbits and the paths. And that, while very, very interesting, it invites us into this wavetable world where we can modulate these waveforms and spend more time thinking about that. But that, for me, seems to be at the loss of some of the more synthesizer control-y bits. What do I mean by that? Well, first and foremost, that the filter has been relegated to a back page. You know, the filter, the one thing you use in a synth all the time, that is now on the effects page, and you've got to dig around to find it, and it's small, and it's just one of another bunch of kind of effects plugins that could be on any synth from any person. Whereas this is a Moog synth, and there's something of an expectation in that. If you look at the original Animoog, it looked fantastically vintage, from the sort of metallic textures on the keys to the oscilloscope, the way that the grid was slightly distorted around the edges because it was on a CRT screen. The filter and all the controls that were there on the front page looked like something from a Moog modular. It had that sense of classic, of iconic looks, of vintageness, and that vibe very much feeds into what you hear and how you experience that synthesizer. With Animoog Z, they've stripped all that back. They've minimalized and modernized, if you like, and streamlined the interface so it no longer has the charm, it no longer has the character of the original Animoog. And I think that's a huge mistake. I think there's a lot in what our eyes feast upon as we're enjoying an instrument that informs on how we relate to it. It doesn't make any difference to the sound, but the way we perceive an instrument that we're playing, the look and that interaction absolutely has an impact upon it. And so when playing with Animoog Z, I want to be able to hear a sound and then play with the filter with my other thumb. I want to mess around in here while playing with the filter, while playing with the effects. To do that in Animoog Z, I've got to go up to another page over here, and then I can play with the filter. On the original, it's right here. The whole lot is right there, just on the side. And the look, the way that the colours cascade around, the movement and the knobs and the look of all of that on the original Animoog, to me, really feeds into everything I love about Moog, because they have so much currency when it comes to vintageness, and they should be using that and capitalising on that every single time. It's not going to look dated because it's Moog, and Moog is dated. That's what we love about it. So the interface, while it's not terrible, nobody's died, nothing bad is going on, I just think it's a shame that they've decided to strip out the vintage vibe, because that removes something. It loses something in that. And I think that's a bit of a shame. However, the flip side being is that you have a whole new dimension to play with in terms of the wavetabling and the modulation. The look of that is beautiful. I love the fact that it can spin perpetually and you can see these comets darting around and orbiting and flying down their paths, and you get a real sense of what's going on because you can see it as well as hear it. That connection is really very, very strong. And then, of course, you can get your fingers in to manipulate it. Now, I've seen video of Suzanne Kiani playing with Animoog Z on an iPad. And that is absolutely where the experience is at its best, because you can get your hand in there. You can stroke along those touch plate keys while you're manipulating other things. And that, I think, really, really works. On the iPhone, it's inevitably more fiddly. And you don't quite get that sense of grandeur of how big it could be because you're sort of farting around in these little places. But it's still excellent. It's still an awful lot of fun. And absolutely you should go and get this and download the free version and play with that, and then spend $10 on the full thing, because it's a fabulously interesting and intriguing synthesizer that gives you a whole range of places to play in terms of timbres and waveforms, in putting that kind of sound design, that kind of modulation, that kind of travel, that kind of movement, all of those things together in a way that I don't think you find on any other synthesizer. So if I was to sum up this opus of Moog Animoog Z wanderings, I would say that the sounds are excellent, just like the original was. The modulation and the manipulation possibilities seem to be endless. The fact that you can now import and record your own timbres in there is fantastic, and it gives you such an interesting space to play, and you're playing with it. You're not really so worried about different parameters. You're worried about the space and how that moves and what happens when that does. And that's a great way to approach synthesis, and it's a different way to something like a mini Moog emulation or some other synthesizer on iOS. So while I wish it looked more classic, it's certainly an excellent piece of work. So there you go. I hope that was helpful. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.